Cheers, homie.
Cheers.
And we're back. We're back. You from the holler of Aarhus and me from a holler down here in the south of Denmark.
Down to test out something new, something radically new. Well, not radically new. It has been done before, but we are testing out a brief format where we just talk for 20 minutes and then we drop the mics after that.
Yeah, man. Like 20, 25 minutes. Cool.
No, just 20 minutes. We'll just try it out
cool.
for 20 minutes and then see.
See if that does anything.
Yeah, to be honest, I have to lay all the cards on the table, and I don't think it's gonna do anything because I think what we are lacking with this channel anyway is marketing methods. Is like distributing it on various channels, various social media channels, newspaper coverage, Discord forums, etc.
I am, however, feeling like this is going to become like increasingly difficult in the future because of the acceleration in society where everybody wants shit faster, quicker, wants the information in 5 minutes instead of 50 minutes.
Yeah. But it also exactly. But that quickness also creates an overstimulation of the individual. So and that overstimulation in turn also creates a paralysis to the individual, so that you don't know, you have trouble orienting yourself in the world. And by the way, this is going to be just casual talk. I'm not going to cite anything.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
We've already done a previous episode on Hartmut Rosa, so if you're interested in sources, go check out that. If anyone is listening to this, anyway.
Hey man, like I have like the perfect example for you regarding what you just said before that. When I worked in that warehouse where I said I was like listening to podcasts all the time when I was working, right? One of these days, I'm like passing by another guy on a forklift, because we would typically like talk whenever we passed each other, So I'm listening to a podcast, or Joe Rogan probably, and this dude was, I don't know, listening to some fucking noisy music, amp up music, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing he says is, fuck you listening to that for? And
wow.
I'm
what
like,
the fuck?
And I'm like, warehouse workers being blunt, right? And I'm like, well, just because I think it's interesting to listen to, learn something new.
Yeah.
And his immediate response was like, it's bullshit. It's just two dickheads talking about bullshit.
Wow.
Like listen to music, man.
Yeah.
And then I got to talking and saying, well, I do that. I do alternate between listening to podcasts and music every day, because it could be like too much when you're listening to 2 Joe Rogan podcasts and 3 hours each. Entirely through a day, right? That's 6 hours of listening.
Yeah.
So I did alternate, but this dude was like, yeah, well, it's still bullshit. I listen to music like this all the time, and then continued on his forklift, raging on.
But it is interesting though, because there is some people who just have a unique ability to just shut down their like they don't need all this intellectual stimulation. And actually people in the 18th century and even before that in the Middle Ages, people that were just like craftsmen that would work in the fields all day long, or in the industrialization, that would work in mines for 70-80 hours a week, they just had this ability to just they would just focus on the work. They wouldn't listen to any music. They wouldn't maybe they would sing like worker songs or something to keep their spirits up. But they would just be totally focused like zombies on their work, and then they would go home after fucking 12
hours
or
yeah.
14-hour workday. They would have a beer because they drank. I just watched a documentary on like beer and how beer has changed the world, and how actually beer is the reason that humanity has settled down in agricultural settlements. And then they would just and that's actually interesting in itself. But then they would go home, they would just have their beer, and then they just space out, wake up the next day, and do that thing.
You know what the miner's breakfast is?
No, but that would be an interesting idea for the YouTube channel. 18th century cooking. They're recreating recipes for how they cooked in the 18th century.
If you Google miner's breakfast, you'll see a beer glass with a raw egg dumped in it.
That's pretty cool. That's like the is that the Rocky breakfast, or I think it's Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, in Rocky, but he didn't do it with beer. He just dumped like 8 raw eggs in a pint glass and then downed it.
Yeah. Fuck. But yeah, there has historically been this ability to just like, of course, you're still a human. You still are more intellectual than animals. But you also have this unique ability to put your work first, like praising the work, and then just being. It's almost like trance, like meditative. When you work, then you don't think about anything else. Then you're just doing that thing.
I have a huge problem with that at my work right now, because that's how they expect.
But the difference is today it's a problem, and I can explain you why today it's a problem today, because today we don't live in this society anymore, because largely because of social media, and there's a lot of, but not just that, but there's a lot of intellectual stuff that surrounds us today that we have to deal with, and that stimulates not just intellectuals, that stimulates everyone in society today, and that's why we're like, you also have warehouse workers or craftsmen who suddenly get like, I want to make this Facebook post because I can be a little intellectual in this area too.
Yeah.
Because that's like that they're stimulated from society in that way, and that's, I mean, in a way that's good, because they're more intellectual than the miner was in the 18th century.
Well,
but it also, the problem with being so with everybody being intellectual is that it doesn't become special anymore.
Look at it this way: the average Joe today have more access to more information by the tip of his fingers than the richest man alive on Earth 30 years ago. That's how evolved this information stream has become in just 3 decades.
But the problem is this average Joe is not able to handle all that information. When he finds an article, he uses it, and it could even, the dangers, that new dangers are even emerging in our society, like fake news and AI. You're like, how the fuck does that average Joe, who's never gone to university, how is he going to know how to differentiate the sources between an AI, fake news, or a real professor?
It's an interesting question, and it's also like begs the question, if you're listening to news, for instance, on real news channels, right?
Yeah.
How do you know how credible information is?
Yeah.
Because these sources aren't listed when you're listening to a news anchor on, for instance, TV2 in Denmark or DR saying something, because they're just going out from what's being reported and the information that is being fed to them inside the studio.
Yeah, and now we're talking about public news outlets, news channels, and there you would actually assume that they would have some sort of, especially if they're governmentally Well, I don't know. Like, there's probably many opinions about that. Like, depending on if you're a liberal or if you're a socialist or if you're conservative. If something is financed by the government in the Western countries, especially in Denmark, then there should be a certain credibility of it already, because they're like trying to make it as objective as possible. At least that's what they teach you in journalist schools in Denmark. Of course, it looks differently if the press is controlled by the government in Russia, for instance. That's a whole different story.
They try to make the news unbiased, but I think it is an extremely difficult task to handle. Making the news reported being unbiased, because everybody would have an opinion. Everybody would have a side they were supporting.
A good place to actually get an overview over how unbiased a news outlet or a newspaper is the World Press Freedom Index. Have you heard about that? It's a French grouping or French organization that is called Reporters Sans Frontières, so Reporters Without Borders. That actually rhymes in English, and they've made it their I've pulled up their website right now. They've made it their mission to like judge, like they're independent, so they have nothing to do with the French government. So they've made it their and I think they have like reporters all over the world that collaborate in this, and they've made it their mission to like rate news outlets. Like here it says 180 countries and territories that they're investigating how much the freedom is. And should we just actually go into the
how much is the freedom in Russia for news outlets?
Yeah, I can actually. Okay, let me just quickly paste you the link so that you also have it in front of you here. There, that is.
Oh jeez!
Just enter that.
It is completely red.
No, wait. No, that's not because there you can see the scale. You can see the scale, right? It's Wikipedia, right? So it's like blue is good,
red
light
is
blue
bad,
is satisfactory, yellow is problematic, orange is difficult, and red is very serious. And what we observe here on this index, and this is, by the way, this is brand new. This is 2024. Here we have all of Russia, China, pretty much the entire Asian continent is like red or orange in regards to freedom of the press. India, actually, I'm surprised that India is also very restricted on the press.
I think that's completely fucked, because Russia, I would have thought if I had known shit, like China too, right? Venezuela too, but the rest there is like a surprise to me, because it's you see like India, the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq.
And also the Middle East, very little press freedom, but I think that can be attributed to religious reasons. Because the Islamic religion, the Quran, maybe not the Quran, but the fundamental, I think, what do you call it? The radical Islamists, not the everyday Muslims, but just the governmental, the fanatics, the fanatics. Those are the ones that they're the ones that are in power in those countries, and they're the ones that are restricting access to freedom of information in the press.
How come there's less freedom in Germany than in Scandinavia?
That's actually a good question, but that I think that has to do with the conservative, and this is a speculation, I don't know it, but it could have something to do with more conservative papers, like papers that are being controlled by. Entire southern Germany is very Catholic, so there could be some still influence from like religious organizations there. But generally, like Germany is still very Christian as opposed to Denmark. Denmark is much more secular, so maybe that could be. I don't know. Then again, I'm just speculating here.
And the U.S. is the yellow.
Yeah,
but that makes sense regarding how extreme their opinions are.
Yeah. Yeah, because of the polarization of the country and because of like fake news with Trump and all that stuff. So that makes sense that we have calculated that into account here. Anything else that's like particularly interesting about this? Greenland. Pretty much, actually, the most interesting thing about this map is that it's Greenland and the Nordic countries that have the most free press in the world, and Portugal and Ireland. Those are the most free countries in the world. I wonder why. But then again, it could have something to do with this, because actually I watched a documentary on HBO, The Swedish Theory of Love, which is about that the most individualistic countries in the world are actually the Nordic countries. Are actually Sweden is the most individualistic. This is I could actually bring up this
I think I understand why it is like this in the Nordic countries. Because
wait,
you know my theory on it.
Yeah.
My theory on it is that in all of the Nordic countries, there is always like a shit ton of parties that in government that ends up collabing to get the power to control it.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? While in America, you only have two parties, or well, technically you have three, but only two that matters, which is the Democrats and the Republicans, right?
Yeah.
Far right or far left.
Yeah.
And in China, you only have one side, and the same in Russia, right?
Yeah.
Or one party, the Communist Party. So it is not surprising to see that Vietnam is red.
Now I found this is basically the graph that I wanted to present before that I couldn't remember, but it's called it's the map that they use in that documentary, The Swedish Theory of Love, on HBO. You should check it out if you haven't checked it out. There they're showing the Engelhard Welzel World Cultural Map from 2013, and that's like two sociologists or like philosophers, I don't know, like one of them is German, I think, but they made this map of country like based on, they have two axes on this graph, and one of them shows like what countries are basically focused on survival, where the country where the individual is only thinking about how do I survive in this, like the survival value is basically like how do I get enough food on the table, how do I get like sanitation, how do I make sure that my kids are not dying, how do I make sure they're healthy enough. On the other end of the spectrum, there we have when you have, meaning if you have all those basic values fulfilled, then you don't need to worry about that anymore, and then you gradually start to worry more and more about what they call self-expression. And that's where you see Sweden is all the way up in that corner. They're the most self-expressionist country in the world, where they don't have to worry about basic survival factors anymore. They have everything they need, but they're worried about how do I look? How do I promote myself as an intellectual being? How do I get the most beautiful art in my home? How do I promote myself and my values? How do I show the world that I'm good? And individualism also plays a key part in that role. How do I show that I'm better than everyone else, as opposed to the collective? And that's where Sweden is big.
Yeah, I get it. Are we on 20 minutes yet?
I'm not sure. Oh yeah, we actually are. So
right. So that's it for.
Yeah. That is actually it for this episode. But yeah, okay. So if you want to know more about this Engelhard Weitzel World Cultural Map, we're probably going to do a whole episode on this at some other point. But for now, we'll let this go.
Yep.
Thanks for joining, Pat. And
no problem.
And see you in another episode.